of supporting that bill because it seemed to that workshop, to many people, which I agree with, that some sort of universal health care, or some kind of national health care system is necessary ultimately for our people to achieve quality health. We investigated that bill, found out that it is not being introduced. There's no plan to introduce it. What's happening is that Congressman Dellums, along I'm sure with many politicians, particularly Democrats, are waiting to see what Bill Clinton is going to propose in his health care plan. We felt that the bill was important whether or not that particular bill is introduced, but that it's important as a model of health care and something that we want to continue to pursue. The Health Committee itself is working on developing a paper which would propose the kind of healthcare system, a model of healthcare that we think is necessary to meet the healthcare needs of the African American community and to allow our people to be in a position of achieving economic development.
At the same time, difficult but rewarding was when we looked at the words of Carter Woodson, Dr. Woodson. And as we looked at them, which was uttered 60 years ago, we were clear that they're still applicable today. And what some of us felt was that within us, we as a people sometimes have difficulty in dealing with the truisms of the vision of Carter G. Woodson. For instance, as you had in your packet, he said, when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go there without being told to. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one out for his special benefit. The education process makes it necessary. In other words, if you listen to what he says, much of what we're saying today and much of the so-called pathologies are not really pathological, but rather the result of an educational system that has attempted from its inception to use us, menial labor, and now sometimes talk about how we meet the needs of contemporary industry, which is in some manner equal to what was done at Elmina Castle way back when we left the shores of Africa. So with that in mind, the discussion centers then on the recognition that the Eurocentric education system that is presently invoked reflects a particular social and economic and political agenda that by design is not in keeping with the agenda of African Americans. And that as we move towards the future, we must develop an Afrocentric educational institution which espouse an African value-based philosophical perspective of self-reliance and the development of a totality of new men and women. Now, you see, when we say that, thank you, but when we say that, some people say, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? What's a new man? What's a new woman? Well, Dr. McIntyre and Assemblyman Green were very clear in their presentations. Dr. McIntyre talked about the need for us to look at the rites of passage, the social institutions in Africa prior to our being brought here to the Americas, because there was no crime as it's understood here, no teenage pregnancy as it's understood here. And there, the relationship and the veneration of the elders, men and women, were done in such a way that there was esteem between the village and the communities. Today, we see that we do not respect our elders, man and woman. And so Charshi talked about the need to look at that reality and inculcate it within any individual economic or educational system that we develop. Secondly, we talked about the need to develop political mechanisms, i.e. political action committees, in order to address the current educational stranglehold on our children's development. This means lobbying for curriculum changes, increased educational expenditures, and collective responsibility agreements between schools, the community, and the families. Another element in the discussion was the sense that many of our teachers have also been miseducated, and they too are miseducating our youngsters. So the call was, and the recommendation is, that any educational system that we develop must have as an important ingredient the re-education of many of our teachers, and so that they could be espoused with the value system that we would like to see expressed in our youngsters. Assemblyman Roger Green talked about the need to develop here at Medgar Evers the Carter G. Woodson Education Enhancement Center, which would be served as a means of doing just that, and at the same time of working with the School of Education here to develop the kind of teachers that will represent and reflect the kind of values that we are talking about. We also talked about the need of creating after-school centers, weekend centers, in order to instill African American with the values, morals, and historical and other information pertaining to people of African descent. These institutions, it is argued strongly, should be family-based and espouse a collective responsibility to address the political, social, and economic issues pertaining to people of African descent. Finally, there was a need to combine the philosophical views of W.E. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and address them as addressed in Carter G. Woodson's book, the need to balance both liberal arts education and industrial education in the holistic educational process. What we want to see happen is that youngsters are involved as scholars and as activists, to see to it that we no longer separate minds from doing, that we talk about a hand-on involvement in education. And part of the dichotomy that's created from a Eurocentric perspective is that if you are a thinker, you are better than a worker. And we're saying that's fallacious. One of the schools that Assemblyman Green talked about, the development of the Benjamin Banneker School, which we're doing things like that. So Assemblyman Green talked in great measure of some of the schools that will be emerging. Here, for instance, the Middle College, which will reflect some of the Ujamaa concept of family-oriented education, will be established. So as we see it then, we're asking that this African-American Youth Leadership Summit recognize that for the continued existence of African Americans, it is important that we challenge the value base of the present educational system, replace it with an African value-centered system that will enhance and help us all as we move forward. Thank you.
Yes, eagerly awaiting was right, and we were not disappointed at the results of the Miseducation of the Negro workshop. And finally, our last report will come from the workshop leader for economic development. And I believe the leader for that workshop was Dr. Gloria Benford. If I'm incorrect, would the workshop leader please come forward? Delois Blakely. Would you come forward, please, and give us the recommendations from the economic development workshop?
This will be shared by one of my colleagues, Raymond. We have been working